Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name's Bill Spencer, working on Microsoft 365 Copilot Extensibility. Today, we have Andy Thompson, a Senior Technical Program Manager, presenting on the Copilot Researcher agent and demonstrating his custom Copilot Connector. Take it away, Andy.
Thanks, Bill. Hey, everybody. Just going to dive right into it. Plan is today to honestly spend a bit more time talking about Copilot connectors and how we can extend Copilot's capabilities for information gathering with your grounded content. I'm going to use an example of something that we worked through with consuming some public-facing data from SEC filings. But let's just kind of dive right in. As Bill said, I'm a technical PM in the Copilot Extensibility and Engineering team. Been at Microsoft for a bit over a decade now. But let's kind of jump in here. What are connectors? This is kind of a loaded term. The most recent and correct term is they're called Copilot connectors, is what we're calling them today. You might have also prior heard them as search connectors and then later graph connectors. Sometimes you will find those terms still being used, but the current terminology in question is called a Copilot connector. And ultimately speaking, a Copilot connector is the capacity or the capability that you have to extend the Microsoft Graph with additional data sources from outside of Graph. Namely, it's used to help surface things up within Microsoft Search, whether that be interface from SharePoint or the Microsoft 365 app, or if you're just in Copilot and you want to do a / we have called out here as Context IQ, or just surfacing within Copilot in general. There are a number of first-party connectors that Microsoft has developed that you can go deploy without any sort of development experience or anything of that nature. It's just a matter of configuration and getting those set up. And we have plenty of documentation available in the Learn docs to go do that. There's all kinds of different stuff already in existence. Like there's some Confluence, ServiceNow, that sort of thing, effectively to allow it to index and crawl your data outside of Graph to make it surfaceable within that view. All that said, the biggest point of why we want to do this today in this day and age is to be able to surface language-based or semantic search-based content, that is well reasoned or well interacted with an LLM-based architecture of something like, say, Copilot. It is key to call out that it's very important to know that text-based content works best here. Structured data is absolutely something that you can do, but you might run into some interesting challenges in terms of how it's surfaced, and there might be some better means to connect that data into Copilot as opposed to a Copilot connector. That said, if we just kind of jump into it, I mean, the big idea of what a Copilot connector is, right, is effectively it's an application that takes content from one location, one data source. Say it's your internal business API, or let's just say for instance of conversation, since that's what we're going to talk about. Let's say it's from the SEC filings database, right? The SEC has an API through something called Edgar, which is their structured filings interface. It's their API that allows you to go and get information from the Securities and Exchange Commission filings for any publicly traded company. And in that, right, it's accessible via an API as long as you're consuming it within their guardrails. But it's a great source of some primarily text-based content, right? Because most of these are text files, stuff like proxy statements. They have all kinds of fun names, 10Ks, 10Qs, quarterly, annual filings, that sort of thing. Lots of insights that can be gathered from it, but there is no specific structure to how they have to be present. So they can be a bit challenging to go and query in traditional query interfaces, which makes it a great place for an LLM to dive in. Because it's the things that Copilot excels at, right? It's a matter of contextual understanding and insights gathering from within largely text-based content. But effectively speaking, the connector is the thing that's going to take the content from your data source or the SEC connector. We're going to crawl that source. We're going to convert it then into a format that we can then upload into Graph. And essentially that's all it's doing, right? We have a component, at least in the solution that I developed, there's a component that does the crawling of the remote source. We have a component that converts that into another format, and then another part of the component that does the uploading and management of that lifecycle within Graph. And in that, it's effectively speaking the content of the documents themselves and some additional metadata that helps for filtering and reasoning capacities, whether it be from your search interfaces as a user or if Copilot is interacting with it. Now, this can go as broad as your imagination wants to take it. Internal systems, can do that, do all kinds of fun stuff with this. If we have, like document sources that perhaps are not part of SharePoint already, without having to go crazy with things. But it's a very neat thing to see your own internal data or some specific data source light up within Copilot and have it become aware of the knowledge and capabilities that exist within that space. Along with that, you get all of the benefits of Microsoft 365 in it, right? You can set up permissions and you manage those permissions, ACLs, by an ACL or an access control list on the components themselves. In this example, we're giving everyone within the company access to this SEC Edgar data because it's public data already. But if you needed to do things like restrict access to certain groups and what have you, you can set those at the item level. Everything is followed through from that, and then viewable then and surfaceable only by people who have permissions to access it. But namely, the biggest thing here is really being able to reliably retrieve that information, and in this instance, exposing it to Copilot, whether that be in regular Copilot chat, the main interface, where it surfaces up alongside everything else, or within an agent context. And that's actually the first thing we're going to show here in just a second. We're going to show what it looks like within a declarative agent. So a very simple, dedicated agent for use in this. And then lastly, that actually extends to all agent capacities. So that could be something like a custom agent you've made in Copilot Studio, or researcher, or analyst. The first-party agents we're going to talk a bit more about towards the end. The important piece to note is if you use a first-party connector, you're not going to have to do much other than configuration. But if you have your own data source, you need to make sure that you put in the effort while doing it to get the content into a form that an LLM is going to understand well. One of the just key call-outs is something that I've seen frequently in terms of working with this sort of data and talking with customers. Frequently, the expectation is if I just take my raw HTML content that I have from a web page, if I would go and scrape a web page and I go and place it there, that I expect it to perform well within Copilot because it's got an HTML tag as one of the things that you can define as the content type. I will state that it can do very well with that, but I have found that you can have much more success in having an intelligent, dedicated parser or converter for your systems to use your own codified intelligence to create that data form into something that makes sense to an unexperienced user. SEC documents are a great example of this. They often have a lot of embedded XML content, which, to be honest, doesn't help a person, let alone an LLM, reason through what that content is. Now, it can do it, and it does so, but any extra content that we're adding that's not important ultimately is going to lower our chances of getting the kind of outputs that we want, both from a retrieval standpoint, and also from a responding standpoint. So when you have specific scenarios or specific applications where you're fully aware of what the shape of that data looks like and what it's most effectively used as, that's the greatest place that you can, as a working with your developer team or as a developer yourself, to go and put that knowledge into your tool such that everybody else gets to benefit from it on consumption. It just makes it easier to debug, to step in and get better insights from. And to that end, we're going to kind of just talk through what that looks like. And before we kick off with that, we probably just need to do a high level of what are agents. I've used that term. It's something that gets thrown around frequently, and it has a lot of different meanings depending on the context. So I think it's important that we kind of level set as to what we mean by agents, and just have a quick little slide to show you here, just differentiating between Copilot and agents in this specific context. Copilot is the solution or product all up, right? It is effectively speaking any interaction you have within the platform in the AI chat interface. Typically, you would go into Copilot chat as it sits, and you can either have a conversation there with Copilot, or you can have a conversation in a dedicated component, whether it be directly in a conversation where you open a new conversation directly with an agent, which is some subset of skills or extra instructions that you've written to allow your users or yourself, if you've made one for yourself, to repeat things, right? It's essentially a customized set of instructions and a limited set of tools that allows to accomplish a more focused task. Those agents can be autonomous, right? In which case they go and often do actions. We're not going to really talk about that here today because we're really talking about the interface layer as it sits. Or they can be, interactive, like bots type experience where it's a one-on-one chat separate from Copilot. You also have the capacity to use the main Copilot chat interface to mention an agent and talk to it directly through that if you don't want to separate it out into a separate pane. But not a huge difference between what the behavior looks like in those capacities. Internally speaking, or within Copilot and the ecosystem, there are a number of what we would call first-party agents or Microsoft developed agents. I say that knowing that I think there's one on here that may not officially be one of these might actually be a template now, but I'll get some clarity on that in a bit. But we're really here to focus on researcher and analyst specifically, but you'll also see other things pop up like agents within SharePoint or the skills agent, or you might see writing coach, that sort of thing, that are first party agents of different types. We'll talk a bit more about researcher, obviously, as part of this demonstration. I think that's one of the reasons why most people are here. But first, we're going to do is we're going to run through just a quick demonstration of the kind of responses you can get using your custom grounding content from within a Copilot connector using just a declarative agent. Now, a declarative agent's not called out here specifically, but ultimately, all a declarative agent is simply what I described before. It is an agent that you define simply by giving it a description and a set of instructions. It's just text-based. And then you select which capabilities or skills that you want to have available to that agent. And the instance of this agent that we're going to show here, and I'll go ahead and jump through to the demo slide. The agent we're going to show here is simply it's called the SEC agent that I have in my demo tenant. And effectively speaking, it has a set of instructions about some specifics that I want it to be able to do and perform. They're fairly straightforward. But then also it's only given the capacity to talk to my external connector. Whereas in Copilot chat, like if I were talking just in the chat interface, that grounding data from the connector would surface up alongside all of the other content to which I have access. But sometimes we want to be a bit more targeted in what we're able to retrieve and have access to. And that's sometimes one of the great things that you can use an agent for is to use that smaller scope, more targeted scope, so you can get better results for a specific topic if there's something like that you need. So just high level, I'm just going to go ahead and get this playing here so we can start it. You can kind of just watch this interaction. Effectively speaking, if we look here as a quick comment, and I'm just asking it to make some comments about the MD&A section in the 2023 proxy filing for Intel, and just gathering some insights. That's the only prompt that was effectively given. You can see even in just this basic interaction, not even using something like researcher, just a single shot response because of the grounding data and the form in which we had it, we get a pretty good answer back to that question. And you can see as we have citations, these are actually the citations that come back from my connector. And because I get to define that, you can see it links back out to the main document there from the grounding content. Just kind of running through this quickly because there's not a whole lot exciting here other than watching me type for a bit and seeing what Copilot iterates. This is a fun one. I'm going to ask it to analyze pay trends across the last 2 years for Microsoft, Apple, and Alphabet. As you see, I started typing Google and had to correct. Just so we can go pull, because there's all information that's available within those filings. There's specific guidance that is required there. So going to query about that in this instance, it's going to go get the last 2 full filings. Now, in this instance, it pulled the proxy forms from 2023 and 2024 just due to the nature and the difference in fiscal year ends, because they didn't quite align there. But you can see where it made its decisions to do it. And we can see the responses back for each. You can see that Sundar took a sizable pay cut there in 2024. I think it had more to do with what he got paid in 23. But you can see the output here is quite verbose just from a pretty straightforward prompt because it has good grounding data to go pull from. And you could go click through those links just like we did on the Intel one to go see the sources where that data was pulled. I just followed the follow-up prompt here to go do essentially a further query to get the pay ratios, because that's another thing that's expected in that response, to show the difference in pay ratio from CEO to employee pay across each of those entities. You can see the fun info that pulls out, and you'll get a nice little comparison here as a result. And this is all done effectively because of the way that the instructions were generated and having some good grounding content that's retrievable. You don't see what this content looks like to Copilot in that stage, which is actually okay, because as a user, it's not really that important. But know that it's effectively put into a format that's almost like a plain text version of that website that we loaded, just to provide some better understanding to what capacities are there. I even went a step further, and it's actually split into the pages that view up on that web page. So each component will pull it on the page level, simply because we get some better context in terms of what's retrieved. That's not required. You can absolutely avoid doing that if not, if you're getting the results that you're wanting to. But I found that with really large data sets, like in this instance, the SEC filings, I think I have about 15 companies indexed, and it's probably about 35 to 40,000 pages worth of content that was consumed just for those. And that was only looking back about 10 years for about 6 different filing types. Obviously, you can configure that however you like, right? It's just a matter of stepping through it. And just showing that quick example of doing another query for NVIDIA, calling out risks specifically, and you can see what it quickly pulled out. Copilot's not necessarily making all of these insights here, right? This is literally just doing content retrieval from within the document sources. But it's interesting to see what kind of information, just from having that available, that you can get into a readily usable form that's easily verifiable too, right? Because everything's cited. You can obviously go and check your work, which I always advise you to do before you make any key decisions in this space, is to make sure that you check everything that's going on and that you can vet what it's saying, especially if you see something that seems a bit off the norm. It's usually going to be correct, but it's always helpful to make sure that we verify that. But let's just say that I don't want to just pull from my one connector that I've got created, or I want to get a better story across web interfaces or all of my document space. And maybe I'm not getting as detailed of an answer as I want in the main BizChat interface. Researcher and analyst are 2 first-party agents that exist for you to be able to go and get a lot of those insights in a more structured manner, or to potentially, especially in the case of researcher, to essentially set it off on a task and let it go. Oftentimes, when we have questions to ask, if I were to go ask a coworker or what have you to go answer a question for me, I don't necessarily always expect an immediate answer. If I do, right, an agent, a declarative agent, or Copilot chat is usually a great way to analog for that. When I need an immediate answer, and it doesn't have to be extremely detailed, I just need a direct answer. Maybe my prompt is less open-ended or what have you. On the other hand, there's sometimes where I need somebody to go look into something for me, to tell me about what they're seeing and what's going on. I mean, that's kind of where researcher comes into play here. Just going to jump into it. Researcher effectively gives you the capacity to do deep reasoning. That's a kind of a loaded term, right? But it's using thinking tokens, and you'll see it here when we go into the demo. You can track kind of its chain of thought as to what's going on in terms of what tools it's going to access, what kind of things it sees, but also then follow up on that without interacting with you necessarily. So in the way that researcher works, you give it an initial prompt, and its first response back is usually not to actually go do it. It's just going to be a response back to you to confirm what it is you're looking for and to ask some clarifying questions. As part of that process, you can clarify, or you can just tell it to use its best judgment. And effectively speaking, you set it on its way, and you come back in some amount of time afterwards, and it's going to give you what it found, usually in a very detailed report. But you have some capability to do that there. Researcher is great for those long thinking topics that may not necessarily be all data analysis, so it can do some amount of that. Oftentimes, it's to derive insights from large breadths of information, especially if you're trying to gather it across multiple sources. So like in the instance of the SEC scenario we're talking about, which is what I'll demonstrate in this a bit as well, it's going to pull content from my work sources. So that would be the connector that I wrote, but it's also going to go and search the internet because it has access to web search within that context. There's some capacity that will be coming at a later date that allows you as a user to select which sources you want it to be able to search. If you want to, lock it down insofar as, I only want to look across, web stuff, or I don't want to look at web and I only want to look at internal work type information. Those sorts of capacities are definitely coming. And obviously certain questions can only be answered in certain contexts as well. But the other first party agent in question here would be analyst. An analyst really is, effectively speaking, it's your Python coding buddy. It's going to go and use reasoning similar to researcher, but instead of necessarily doing deep textual insights and analysis, it does do that, but to a different degree. Its primary focus is about extracting data from content sources and then making analysis of that data and presenting that back to you in a consumable fashion. But it's largely focused around data-driven insights, not necessarily text-driven insights. Now, it does do that, right? Because that's effectively where it's usually going to get that sort of information, to extract, data points, to track change over time, to see it in a graph type view as opposed to just in a report. But just to call that out there as something that's present. And we just have a quick high level about when to use which. I kind of already went into this, so I'm not going to drain the slide here. If you couldn't tell already, I'm not typically somebody who follows slides a good deal. I just kind of talk about where we're at, but there's some criteria to what's here. And as you come back to look, it's really a matter of breaking down between, do I need, a more verbose, in-depth report on something, or do I need something that's more data-driven? Like analyst, I akin more to something like what I would want to view data more like in a Power BI type application, whereas researcher would be like a Word doc. Now, they're not a direct correlation there, and you can have some crossover between them, but at least my mental model, that's where I kind of make that break. That said, I'm not an expert, and I'm sure that there's people on this call who've probably done way more fun things than I have with either of these. And that's one of the cool things about working in the space is we all get to teach people new things and learn new things all the time, let alone the fact that the technology is constantly changing and we always get to keep track of that. That said, I'm going to quickly jump through this demo and kind of get this rolling. As you can see, we're doing a similar prompt to what we did before, this time talking about R&D and CapEx expenditures from annual filings for Microsoft. That's the 10K. You don't necessarily have to use terms like that, but I am, because I know them and it helps me gather what I'm looking for. And then just getting it to call out what kind of stuff stands out and what have you. As this is rolling, because we're kind of coming up on time, I know we only scheduled for a half an hour today. I want to make sure that we get a chance to address any questions. So while this is rolling, I'm going to show what this is doing. It's doing that first step response like we talked about, where it's going to give me a response back with essentially verifying what it is I'm looking for and some follow-ups to which I will answer its question, and then we'll kick it off. Once that kicks off, we'll let it go for a bit because typically this is a go grab a cup of coffee type deal, or it's your chance to go work on something else. It's going off to do something for you on your behalf, so you don't have to sit there and watch it. But to that end, I'm going to kick it off here. You're going to see the chain of thought pop up in a little box here in just a second. If at any point you can always see it, you can expand it, see what it's thinking through. You can always step through what that information looks like, or you can leave it collapsed like this and not. It's all up to you. But you can see the tasks that it's set out for itself, right? And then what it's currently working on. And it's pretty simple UI. You don't have to watch it. This is now going to kick off and run. But to that end, do we have any questions in the chat that I can take some time to address while this is very quickly going through this? It does not perform this quickly, just for everybody's awareness. This is about 16x speed, as I didn't want us to watch. This is like a 15-minute query or so to generate.
Thank you, Andy. We did have a couple questions. An important recurring one is in regards to the privacy of the queries. So do you just want to address who else other than the person who submits the queries or the prompts to the researcher agent? And this, I think, is true of Copilot in general. Who else sees it?
So the only people that are going to see your queries are the people that have permissions to. There's not an explicit share capacity, right? So it's you as the user, but it's all controlled via purview and what have you. So anything that would be discoverable in that same context would be the same here. Nobody at Microsoft can see that unless you explicitly give permissions via the feedback option, if it's enabled or disabled for your environment. But ultimately, that is strictly you. Nobody else can see it unless they have permissions to go see it for some other reason, being an admin doing, that's certainly like a discovery type exercise in Purview. And you can see just an example of the report. This is a pretty in-depth report. I'm going to have it roll through here in the background. We don't have to dive into it. But you can see that it was quite an in-depth report. I think the one caveat that I like to call out when we get to the end of this report is you can see that we have data sources from all over the place in terms of what it's cited in this, and we have several of them. I don't know if I expanded this one out, but I think this specific query had about 25 or so different data sources that were cited. Any other questions, Bill?
I'm going to encourage Rima and or Christina to come and surface any questions they saw.
Hey, Andy, I do have one. So there's a person that asked, for these agents that you're building, do I have to populate the resources it pulls from, or is it pulling from all internal and external resources? I know there are two different agents, so if you want to call those out.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so to that end, researcher, no, you don't do that. And actually, you don't have the capacity to do that today. It has access to what you have access to within that configuration. On a declarative agent, like what we showed in the first place, you do have to specify. So if you don't specify that, it only has access to its instruction set and the model knowledge. Maybe what you want, probably not in most instances. But you can effectively, you can go build those agents like a declarative agent. You can build in a number of different places. It can be Copilot Studio. If you go the route of building a declarative agent, it can be what we call Agent Builder. Right there within the Copilot chat interface, you can create an agent, and that's a declarative agent you're making when you do that. And it's part of that process where you build out your description and your instructions and like starter prompts, that sort of thing. You can select what skills or capabilities, sorry, that's the right word, that you want that to have. But yeah, you do have to select that when you're creating an agent. It doesn't broadly have access to everything. It only has access to what you give it access to. And when I say you give it access, let's add one additional caveat. It only has access to what the user of the agent has permissions to. So if I say that this agent can use this connector that I've built and I have it restricted down with ACLs, since I can do that, and I share it with my friend who doesn't have the same permissions that I do, he or she is only going to have access to the content in that connector that they have access to. It doesn't show up or accelerate or expand upon anything within that capacity. Sometimes it can show you that you might have access to more things than you thought you did. That's a different conversation that we don't have time for today. But it always abides by the user's permissions. And when I say user, that's the consumer of the agent or the agent upon whom it's acting on behalf. Same thing within researcher. Thanks, Rocky. Anything else?
Yep. There's another question that came in. So, Andy, you just did a demo between an SEC agent and creating a custom graph connector. There are customers that are interested. If we wanted to build this ourselves for use in their own company, are there instructions that can be provided, or how can they
Absolutely. So, pull up the resources slide here. We're going to quick high level. I think, Rocky, you're going to share these in the chat. From a links perspective, since we can't click on them directly here, the source code for the agent or for the connector that we use for the SEC data will be available in that GitHub repository. I will tell you today that it is purely sample code. It is not something that's directly supported. It's something that's in my personal repository. And as of right now, if you were to go click on that link, it is not currently uploaded yet because I'm still finalizing a few things I want to make sure that are present before it is, but it will be shortly. If you don't want to go that route, we do have documentation about building your own connector. If it's a different data source, you want to look through something else. Matter of fact, recently released the capability to build custom connectors within the agents toolkit, which essentially frameworks it as an Azure Function app using JavaScript. It's language agnostic. You can use whatever you'd like to, as long as it can make calls to graph. As a matter of fact, a good portion of this demo was created when the agent was merely an amalgamation or collection of a bunch of scripts. So it can be as basic or as advanced as you need it to be. Obviously, for resiliency and longer term functionality, you'd want to make sure that it's something that's a resilient system. But it's not a real time process. So like it's something that you can configure to run as you do, and you have full control over that. It could be a point in time type thing, or it could be something where you have a task that's running consistently. Use any of those first party connectors, that's already happening automatically for you. But if you go to write your own to ingest that sort of content, that's completely left up to you, because it really just becomes the component to go from point A to point B, where point A is your data and point B is Copilot effectively.
And I'll be sending out an email with the recording of Andy's presentation and links to these resources as well. So thank you for Rocky for posting them in chat, and I'll be sharing them in email to all the registered users as well. Any other questions? The last call, Rocky, Rima, Christina.
I think we are good.
All right.
Thank
You all very much. Oh, I'm sorry. Anything else, Christina?
No, I just said I think we're good.
Great. Thank you all very much. We may answer some additional follow-up questions in the email, so feel free to post them in chat. And I really appreciate everyone joining today. Thank you, Andy, so much for the presentation. If you have ideas for similar presentations that you'd like, please share them here in chat or respond to my email, and we'll try to organize those with the right presenters. Thank you all very much.